The boy's question reached Ethan Crawford before the ocean breeze could carry it away. And for one suspended second, every sound on Hilton Head Island seemed to recede. "If you have everything," the child asked, studying him with solemn brown eyes, "why do you look like you lost someone?" Ethan had spent 20 years answering hostile investors, federal regulators, and journalists trained to expose hesitation, yet he could not answer a 7-year-old holding a blue bucket of seashells. Before he found the courage to try, a woman called the boy's name from farther down the beach, and the child turned toward a voice Ethan had once expected to hear for the rest of his life. Maya Brooks stood near the tide line, one hand lifted against the sun, and when she saw Ethan beneath the striped umbrella, her face changed with a fear too immediate to be mistaken for surprise. She crossed the sand quickly, took the boy's hand, and thanked Ethan with the distant politeness reserved for strangers who had accidentally come too close. The child looked between them, confused by the silence, then introduced himself as Noah, before Maya gently guided him away. Ethan watched them disappear among families carrying towels and beach chairs, noticing Noah's dark curls, the determined tilt of his chin, and the tiny crescent-shaped scar beside his left eyebrow. Ethan had carried the same scar since childhood, after falling from his grandfather's porch, and although reason warned him against building a life-changing conclusion from resemblance, his body had already recognized something his mind resisted. Maya had been gone 12 years, and Noah appeared to be almost exactly the age of the future they had once planned. Ethan's phone vibrated repeatedly inside his canvas bag, displaying messages from board members who believed his overdue vacation should include only approved leisure and carefully managed press appearances. He silenced the device, then walked toward the public beach access where Maya and Noah had vanished, but the parking area held only departing cars and wind-blown sand. A hotel employee remembered seeing Maya leave in a gray sport utility vehicle with South Carolina plates, although he could offer nothing more. Ethan returned to his suite with the numb concentration he usually reserved for corporate emergencies, yet the room felt smaller each time he replayed Maya's expression. She had not looked angry enough to hate him, or indifferent enough to have forgotten him. She had looked like someone protecting a truth that had survived too long to be exposed carelessly. That evening, Ethan opened the locked compartment inside his travel case and removed a small velvet ring box he had carried through 3 relocations, 2 recessions, and countless hotel rooms. Inside rested the engagement ring Maya had returned by certified mail 11 years earlier, accompanied by a single typed sentence stating that some promises became cruel when only one person continued believing them. Ethan had never understood why she chose those words, because he had returned from Europe, desperate to find her, and discovered their Charleston apartment empty, her hospital transfer approved, and every mutual friend unable to explain. His attorney had advised him not to pursue a woman who had made her decision clear, while his company's chairman, Thomas Reed, insisted the collapsing business needed Ethan's complete attention. Ethan had obeyed the logic of survival, but he had never accepted the story. Near midnight, he searched public medical directories and found Dr. Maya Brooks listed as a pediatric specialist at a respected Charleston clinic, then discovered a community article praising her work with families displaced by coastal storms. A photograph showed Maya beside Noah at a science fair, his name printed beneath the image without any mention of a father. Ethan stared at the boy's face until possibility became unbearable, then called Lena Ortiz, a former federal investigator who now handled private risk assessments for Crawford Technologies. He asked her to verify only publicly accessible facts, specifically Noah's age, Maya's marital history, and whether any legal record identified the child's father. Lena warned that personal investigations became invasive quickly, and Ethan instructed her to stop before contacting anyone or accessing protected information. The preliminary report arrived the following afternoon, establishing that Noah Brooks had been born 7 months after Ethan returned from Europe, that Maya had never married, and that no father appeared on publicly available filings. The dates did not prove paternity, but they destroyed the comforting assumption that coincidence explained everything. Lena included one additional discovery she considered unusual. During the year Ethan and Maya separated, Maya had sent at least 6 certified letters to corporate addresses connected with Ethan, and company mail logs showed that someone signed for 3 of them. Ethan recognized the initials immediately, because TR belonged to Thomas Reed, the chairman who had claimed for years that Maya never attempted to reach him. Ethan called Thomas from the balcony, overlooking the dark Atlantic, asking whether he remembered receiving personal correspondence during the European crisis. Thomas paused before dismissing the question as ancient history, then reminded Ethan that failing companies generated thousands of misplaced documents. His tone sharpened when Ethan mentioned Maya's name, and he advised him not to disturb a woman who had clearly built another life. Ethan ended the call without revealing Noah, because instinct told him the man who had guided every major decision of his career was suddenly afraid of a child he had never met. At sunrise, Ethan drove toward Charleston with the ring box in his pocket and the mail logs beside him, knowing he was no longer searching only for a lost relationship. He was searching for the person who had decided that his family was an acceptable price for saving his company. Charleston appeared beneath a gray morning sky, familiar enough to awaken memories, yet changed enough to remind Ethan that 12 years had passed without his permission. He parked across from Maya's clinic, but remained inside the car, unwilling to enter her workplace and turn a private wound into a public confrontation. Through the windows, he watched her kneel beside a frightened child, demonstrate a medical instrument on a stuffed bear, and wait until the little girl stopped crying before continuing the examination. Nothing in Maya's manner suggested the bitterness Ethan had imagined during their separation. She had built a life around patience, while he had built one around urgency. When the clinic closed, Maya stepped outside alone, saw his car immediately, and walked toward him with the controlled expression of someone who had spent the day preparing for an encounter she hoped would not come. "You had someone investigate us," she said after entering a quiet courtyard beside the clinic, where flowering crepe myrtles softened the traffic noise. Ethan admitted requesting public records, then apologized without defending the decision, because he understood how power could transform fear into intrusion. Maya crossed her arms and asked what he believed he had discovered. He told her about Noah's age, the missing father's name, and the certified letters signed for by Thomas Reed, but he stopped before asking the question that had brought him there. Maya's expression tightened when she heard Thomas's name, and she quietly asked whether Ethan had ever received the letter sent from her hospital after the hurricane. He answered that he had received nothing from her except the returned engagement ring and the typed sentence ending their relationship. Maya stared at him as though one of them had misunderstood the language they had spoken their entire lives. She reached inside her tote bag, removed her phone, and showed him a photograph of a letter bearing Ethan's signature, delivered to her temporary apartment shortly before Noah's birth. The letter stated that Ethan regretted the pregnancy, but could not jeopardize thousands of employees by allowing personal obligations to interfere with the international restructuring. It offered financial support through company attorneys and requested that all future communication avoid his private channels. Ethan read the page twice, recognizing the digital signature copied from corporate correspondence, but not the words, the phrasing, or the cruelty behind them. "I never wrote this," he said, and Maya's eyes filled with anger that 12 years of restraint could no longer contain. She reminded him that denial cost nothing now, while believing that letter had cost her every hope she carried into pregnancy. Ethan did not ask for trust, because the forged message could have been created by anyone with access to his executive account, and he had spent years granting Thomas nearly unrestricted control during the company's crisis. He instead asked Maya to preserve the document and allow an independent digital examiner to inspect its metadata. Maya refused initially, warning that Noah's stability mattered more than correcting Ethan's memory, but Ethan promised he would not approach the child again without her permission. His willingness to step back unsettled her more than pressure would have, because the ambitious man she remembered had treated every obstacle as something to overpower. That evening, Maya invited him to speak on her front porch after Noah went to bed, although she kept the door locked and remained several feet away. She brought a weathered storage box containing returned envelopes, prenatal photographs, and copies of emails sent to accounts Ethan had used before Europe. Several messages showed delivery failures after Crawford Technologies migrated its servers during emergency restructuring, while others appeared successfully received but never answered. Ethan examined the dates and realized that Thomas had overseen the server migration, executive communications, and every legal channel connecting him to home. The evidence did not yet prove deliberate interference, but it revealed a system in which one man could decide which parts of Ethan's life deserved access to him. Maya finally answered the question neither of them could avoid, explaining that Noah was almost certainly Ethan's son, although she had never pursued legal confirmation after receiving the rejection letter. She had placed no father on the birth certificate because she refused to bind her child to a man she believed considered him a threat to corporate survival. Noah knew only that his father and mother had become separated during a crisis before he was born, and Maya had never taught him to hate someone he did not know. Ethan lowered his head, struggling against the grief of birthdays, illnesses, first words, and ordinary mornings that existed without him. Maya warned that sorrow did not grant him immediate fatherhood because biology could establish origin while only consistency established belonging. Before Ethan could respond, headlights swept across the front yard, and a black sedan stopped beside the curb. Thomas Reed stepped onto the sidewalk wearing the composed expression that had reassured investors through countless emergencies, yet his presence outside Maya's home revealed that he had been monitoring Ethan's search. Thomas asked to speak privately, claiming the company faced an acquisition vote that could collapse if personal allegations damaged leadership confidence. Maya moved closer to the door, while Ethan noticed Thomas's eyes settle briefly on the storage box beside her chair. When Thomas offered to explain everything in exchange for discretion, Ethan understood that the man had not driven from New York to protect a company from rumor. He had come because somewhere inside that box was evidence he believed should have disappeared 12 years earlier. Ethan refused to leave Maya's porch, forcing Thomas to explain himself in front of the woman whose life had been shaped by his decisions. Thomas maintained that he had acted during an emergency when Crawford Technologies faced insolvency. 800 employees risked losing their jobs, and European investors threatened to withdraw unless Ethan remained entirely focused. He admitted screening personal correspondence and instructing assistants to delay anything unrelated to litigation, but he described those choices as temporary safeguards rather than permanent interference. Maya placed the forged rejection letter on the porch table and asked whether protecting employees required telling a pregnant woman that her child was unwanted. Thomas looked at the page without surprise, which answered more than any confession could have. He claimed the letter had been drafted after Maya's repeated messages destabilized Ethan during negotiations, although Ethan remembered no such messages reaching him. Thomas argued that one emotional departure could have destroyed the restructuring, leaving families across several states without income or health insurance. Ethan asked why he was never told after the company survived, and Thomas replied that success made reopening the damage unnecessary. The statement revealed the morality beneath every decision. Thomas had not considered Maya and Noah human beings entitled to truth, but variables whose pain became acceptable once the balance sheet improved. When Ethan demanded access to the original communications archive, Thomas warned that the servers had been legally decommissioned years earlier and any surviving records would expose the company to acquisition disputes. Maya refused Thomas's offer of compensation and ordered him off her property, but before leaving, he turned toward Ethan and quietly reminded him that the board vote occurred in 48 hours. If Ethan accused him publicly without undeniable evidence, Thomas could portray the confrontation as an unstable billionaire reacting to an unconfirmed paternity claim. Ethan understood the threat because the acquisition would protect thousands of jobs, fund medical technology programs, and secure retirement accounts held by longtime employees. Exposing Thomas immediately might satisfy anger while endangering people who had never known what occurred. Remaining silent, however, would repeat the choice that had already stolen 12 years from Maya and Noah. The following morning, Ethan met Lena Ortiz inside a rented conference room and gave her the forged letter, mail logs, and Maya's preserved email copies. Lena's examiner discovered that the rejection letter had been printed from a template created on a Crawford Technologies legal server, then routed through a Charleston Courier account authorized by Thomas's office. The metadata proved institutional origin but not authorship, because several executives possessed access during the restructuring. More important was a reference number embedded beneath the signature block, connecting the letter to a restricted legal project called Harbor Shield. Ethan remembered Harbor Shield as the internal name for protecting the company's intellectual property during the European lawsuit, yet no family correspondence should have existed inside that file. Lena located one retired systems engineer, Marcus Hale, whose name appeared on the server migration records. Marcus agreed to meet only after Ethan guaranteed that the conversation would not be recorded without permission. He explained that Thomas ordered the creation of a separate mailbox mirroring Ethan's executive account, allowing selected messages to be intercepted before reaching his devices. Marcus believed the system protected sensitive negotiations, but months later he discovered personal emails being redirected and questioned the practice. Thomas terminated him under a confidentiality agreement, while the company paid enough severance to discourage further inquiry. Marcus had preserved no company files, yet he retained a handwritten maintenance ledger containing dates, ticket numbers, and the names of executives who approved each change. The ledger established that Maya's first pregnancy email reached the mirrored mailbox 3 days before Thomas told Ethan that communication systems had failed because of hurricane damage. It also showed that the mailbox remained active for 9 months after the European crisis ended, undermining Thomas's claim that interference was temporary. Ethan could expose the deception, but Lena warned that releasing incomplete technical evidence before securing the archived server image might allow Thomas to destroy remaining records. She recommended obtaining authorization through Crawford Technologies' Independent Audit Committee, which required disclosing the conflict to board members before the acquisition vote. Ethan would have to choose between protecting the transaction and protecting the truth, without knowing whether either decision preserved the company. That afternoon, Maya agreed to bring Noah to a neutral family counselor recommended by the hospital, because secrecy could not continue while adults investigated his identity around him. They explained that Ethan and Maya had known each other before Noah was born, and that medical testing could answer whether Ethan was his biological father. Noah listened without speaking, then asked why Ethan had taken so long to find him. Ethan resisted every temptation to blame Thomas, the hurricane, or corporate pressure, because a child deserved an answer, grounded in responsibility. He admitted that someone had hidden information, but he had also accepted silence instead of continuing to search. Noah asked whether Ethan would disappear again if the test proved they were related, and Ethan answered that no document could make him trustworthy overnight. He promised only that he would show up whenever Maya allowed, tell the truth even when it embarrassed him, and never ask Noah to protect an adult's reputation. Noah considered the promise, then agreed to the test on one condition. Ethan had to attend his science camp presentation before the results arrived. As they left the counselor's office, Ethan received an emergency message announcing that Thomas had moved the acquisition vote forward by 24 hours. The timing forced Ethan to decide before the laboratory could establish whether the child he intended to protect was truly his son. The boardroom occupied the highest floor of Crawford Technologies' Manhattan headquarters, where glass walls overlooked a city that had rewarded Ethan for never appearing uncertain. 12 directors gathered around the polished table expecting him to endorse the acquisition, while Thomas presented projections promising growth, stability, and protection for thousands of employees. Ethan listened until the presentation ended, then distributed copies of the forged letter, mirrored mailbox records, and Marcus Hale's maintenance ledger. He explained that the company's chairman might have used corporate systems to intercept personal communications, falsify a message in Ethan's name, and conceal the existence of a child. Several directors reacted with disbelief, while others avoided looking at Thomas, suggesting that his methods had frightened people long before anyone challenged them. Thomas denied authoring the letter and argued that Ethan's emotional involvement made him incapable of evaluating incomplete evidence. He reminded the board that delaying the acquisition could reduce the offer, destabilize stock prices, and provoke employee layoffs. Ethan acknowledged every risk, then requested an independent forensic investigation and temporary suspension of the vote until the company determined whether its legal infrastructure had been used for personal manipulation. Thomas demanded to know whether Ethan would sacrifice thousands of livelihoods for an unconfirmed son, phrasing the question precisely to make truth appear selfish. Ethan answered that any company requiring hidden crimes to remain stable had already placed those livelihoods in danger. The board divided almost evenly, but Dr. Evelyn Park, chair of the audit committee, revealed that she had received an anonymous package that morning containing an encrypted storage device. The device held a partial backup from the Harbor Shield server, including approval messages between Thomas and the company's former general counsel. One message instructed the legal team to resolve the domestic distraction before Crawford abandons negotiations, while another approved the forged rejection letter after Maya disclosed her pregnancy. Thomas claimed the messages lacked context, yet the final exchange discussed returning Maya's engagement ring with language designed to convince Ethan that she had willingly ended the relationship. The evidence showed that Thomas had deceived both of them, allowing each to believe the other had chosen abandonment. Federal counsel advised the board to preserve every device and notify authorities, while the directors postponed the acquisition and removed Thomas from operational authority. Security escorted him from the room without spectacle, but Ethan felt no victory as the doors closed. The company's stock fell before noon, reporters surrounded headquarters, and employees learned that an executive scandal might threaten the transactions securing their future. Ethan released a statement accepting responsibility for creating a leadership structure where one advisor controlled information without meaningful oversight. He refused to portray himself solely as Thomas's victim, because ambition had made him willing to let another man filter every inconvenience from his life. Instead of remaining in New York to manage public appearances, Ethan delegated the crisis to Evelyn and returned to South Carolina for Noah's science presentation. His communications team warned that photographs of him at a children's camp during a corporate emergency might appear irresponsible, but Ethan answered that absence disguised as responsibility had already cost enough. At the camp, Noah demonstrated a water purification model built from sand, charcoal, and recycled containers, explaining each stage with intense concentration. Ethan arrived before the presentation began, took a seat beside Maya, and kept his phone turned off until Noah completed every question from the judges. When Noah saw him applauding, relief crossed his face so quickly that Ethan understood presence mattered most when someone had reason to expect disappointment. Afterward, the laboratory called Maya with the completed DNA results, but she asked Ethan to wait until they could speak privately with the counselor. The sealed report remained inside her bag during lunch, transforming every ordinary conversation into a bridge suspended over uncertainty. Noah eventually asked them to open it together beneath an oak tree behind the community center, insisting he preferred truth outside an office filled with serious furniture. Maya read the conclusion aloud. The probability that Ethan was Noah's biological father exceeded 99.9%. Noah looked at Ethan for several seconds, then asked whether anything was supposed to feel different immediately. Ethan told him nothing needed to change before he was ready, because DNA explained where his life began but did not command how he should feel. Noah admitted he was happy, angry, and confused at the same time, especially because adults had allowed one man's decisions to control so many years. Maya assured him that mixed emotions were not disloyal, while Ethan promised they would build whatever relationship Noah chose at a pace that felt safe. Noah did not call him dad or rush into his arms. He simply asked whether Ethan could help finish the model rocket they had discussed on the beach. Ethan accepted the invitation as the beginning it truly was. That evening, Maya received a call from the Children's Hospital informing her that reporters had discovered Noah's connection to Ethan and were gathering outside her neighborhood. Someone had leaked the DNA appointment, transforming a child's private truth into material for a corporate scandal. Ethan assumed Thomas had arranged the leak before losing authority, but proving it would take time they did not have. Maya looked through the window at Noah assembling rocket pieces at the kitchen table and made a decision Ethan had not anticipated. She would not hide her son, abandon their home, or allow wealthy men to move him like another piece on a board. Instead, she would confront the story publicly before strangers could write it for him. Maya agreed to one carefully controlled statement outside the children's clinic, with no questions about Noah's school, medical history, or daily routines. She stood beside Ethan, but refused to let him speak first, making clear that this was not the billionaire's redemption story presented through a mother and child. Maya explained that Noah had grown up safe, loved, and emotionally secure, while recent evidence showed that corporate officials had deliberately separated his parents through intercepted communication and forged correspondence. She asked reporters to distinguish public accountability from a child's private identity, then warned that anyone photographing Noah without consent would face immediate legal action. Ethan followed by confirming paternity and admitting that although he had been deceived, his dependence on unchecked authority had made the deception possible. The honesty changed the public narrative, but it did not eliminate consequences. Several investors withdrew from the acquisition, employees feared layoffs, and Thomas's attorneys accused Ethan of manipulating family sympathy to preserve control. Ethan responded by stepping down temporarily as chief executive officer and placing voting authority with the independent board committee overseeing the investigation. He created no dramatic rescue through personal wealth, because using money to erase institutional damage would only repeat the belief that power solved everything. Instead, he agreed to guarantee employee health benefits for 12 months, while the board pursued alternative financing, using a legally structured fund that prevented him from controlling company decisions in exchange. Thomas was eventually charged with electronic fraud, obstruction, and falsification of corporate records after investigators recovered the complete Harbor Shield archive. The evidence revealed that he had genuinely believed saving Crawford Technologies justified removing every emotional risk surrounding Ethan, including Maya's pregnancy. He had not acted from romantic jealousy or personal hatred, but from a distorted conviction that companies mattered more than the lives sacrificed to preserve them. That motive made his betrayal more disturbing, because it reflected a culture that praised outcomes while refusing to examine the human cost. Ethan testified truthfully, including details that exposed his own indifference toward employees and friends who once tried to question Thomas's control. During the following months, Ethan traveled between New York and Charleston according to a schedule created with Maya, Noah, and their family counselor. He attended school events, helped with homework, and learned that fatherhood consisted mostly of repeated obligations no audience considered remarkable. Noah tested him through small challenges, sometimes changing plans, asking difficult questions, or refusing invitations without explanation. Ethan accepted each boundary without purchasing forgiveness through gifts, although resisting grand gestures required more discipline than any negotiation. When Noah wanted a telescope, Ethan helped him save allowance money and searched for a used model instead of ordering the most expensive equipment available. Maya watched Ethan's consistency without pretending that restored trust automatically restored romance. She still remembered giving birth while believing the man she loved had rejected their child, and no legal finding could remove the loneliness of those years. Ethan apologized without asking her to translate his regret into another chance. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond Noah, yet both understood that tenderness could coexist with caution, and history could not be repaired through nostalgia. Maya needed proof that Ethan had changed his relationship with ambition, not merely rearranged his calendar during a crisis. 6 months after the beach encounter, Crawford Technologies secured a smaller partnership that protected core research divisions without surrendering control to the original buyer. The agreement required executive reforms, whistleblower protections, and transparent oversight of internal communications. Ethan declined the board's invitation to resume his former position immediately, recommending Evelyn Park as permanent chief executive officer while he remained a non-executive founder. He explained that leadership had become indistinguishable from ownership in his mind, and stepping aside was necessary before he could discover whether service mattered without authority. Noah's school announced a family appreciation assembly shortly afterward, and he spent several evenings writing a speech he refused to show either parent. Ethan promised to attend, but faced an unexpected complication when Thomas's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the same morning in New York. Prosecutors requested Ethan's personal impact statement, arguing that his testimony could influence accountability and public understanding. Noah told him the hearing sounded more important than a school program, although disappointment entered his voice despite the brave explanation. Ethan realized the conflict resembled every decision he once justified by claiming important work could not wait. He recorded a factual statement for the court, declined to seek personal revenge, and asked prosecutors to focus on restitution, institutional reform, and protection for employees harmed by Thomas's conduct. Then he boarded an overnight commercial flight after weather-grounded private aircraft, arriving in Charleston with barely enough time to change his shirt. Traffic stalled near the school, forcing him to leave the car and run the final blocks through steady rain. When he entered the auditorium, Noah was already approaching the microphone, scanning the audience with growing resignation. Ethan slipped into the final row, soaked, breathless, and unnoticed by everyone except the boy, whose face immediately changed when he saw that another promise had survived inconvenience. Noah unfolded his paper, but did not begin with the speech he had practiced, because seeing Ethan in the final row changed what he wanted to say. He thanked Maya for teaching him that kindness required strength, especially when people had reasons to become bitter. Then he described meeting a lonely stranger on the beach, who listened to questions adults usually avoided, helped build a channel through wet sand, and eventually discovered that some answers changed more than one life. Noah told the audience that Ethan was his biological father, but he did not say the laboratory result made them a family. He said Ethan became his father each time he arrived, when leaving would have been easier. The applause remained gentle rather than theatrical, allowing Noah's words to belong to the people who understood their meaning. Ethan lowered his head as emotion overcame the composure that had survived congressional hearings and collapsing markets. Maya looked toward him from the third row, recognizing that he had not chosen the assembly because it offered greater public value than the sentencing hearing. He had chosen it because a child should never learn that promises became optional whenever adults discovered more prestigious obligations. After the ceremony, Noah ran toward Ethan and embraced him without hesitation, using the word "dad" so naturally that neither of them attempted to make the moment larger than it already was. Thomas received a federal sentence that included imprisonment, restitution, and permanent restrictions against serving as an officer of a public company. Ethan submitted no request for maximum punishment, because accountability did not require hatred to remain meaningful. Maya also declined to speak at sentencing, explaining that she had spent enough years allowing Thomas's decisions to occupy emotional space inside her life. The most important consequence was not watching him fall, but ensuring that no executive could again control another person's access to truth without oversight. Crawford Technologies later established an independent ethics office named for Marcus Hale, whose decision to preserve a handwritten ledger had prevented powerful people from rewriting history completely. A year passed through ordinary routines that gradually became a shared life, although Ethan maintained his own home nearby, rather than forcing romance into the structure of fatherhood. He drove Noah to science club on Wednesdays, attended medical appointments when invited, and learned to prepare grilled cheese sandwiches cut diagonally because Noah insisted triangles tasted better. Maya occasionally joined them for dinners, beach walks, and community events, but she protected time that belonged only to herself. Ethan respected those limits, discovering that love expressed through patience felt less dramatic than possession and far more difficult to fake. During a summer camping weekend at Huntington Beach State Park, Noah fell asleep beside the fire after spending the day launching rockets, identifying shorebirds, and teaching Ethan the proper way to toast marshmallows. Maya and Ethan remained beneath the live oaks while distant waves moved beyond the dunes. Ethan told her he still loved her, but he did not offer the preserved engagement ring or ask her to restore the future they once imagined. He explained that his feelings were not a request, because she deserved love that did not arrive carrying an obligation to heal the person offering it. Maya admitted that part of her had never stopped loving him, while another part still remembered how completely she had learned to survive without him. They agreed that beginning again would require something different from resuming where they stopped. There would be counseling, separate homes, honest conflict, and no promises larger than the actions supporting them. Months later, Ethan asked Maya to dinner at the quiet waterfront restaurant where they had once celebrated his first funding agreement. He brought no photographers, security team, or hidden audience. Only the old velvet ring box and a new letter written by hand. The letter acknowledged that the original ring belonged to a promise made by younger people who believed love could survive without attention. Ethan asked whether Maya would help him create a new promise measured through presence, truth, and the freedom to say no. Maya did not answer immediately, because happiness earned through maturity had no reason to imitate a cinematic rescue. She read the letter twice, asked several difficult questions, and reminded Ethan that marriage could not become proof of his redemption. Ethan agreed that whether she accepted or refused, he would remain Noah's father and honor every boundary they established. Maya finally opened the ring box, but left the diamond inside, telling him they should choose another ring together when they were ready. Her answer was not an immediate engagement, yet it contained something more trustworthy than certainty: permission to continue building. The following summer, the three of them returned to Hilton Head Island and walked toward the place where Noah's innocent question had interrupted Ethan's carefully managed loneliness. Noah, now taller and endlessly curious, collected seashells, while Maya watched dolphins surface beyond the breaking waves. He asked Ethan whether having a family meant he finally possessed everything he wanted. Ethan answered that people were not possessions, and that family meant becoming worthy of the trust offered each day. Noah considered the response, then asked the question that had once frightened truth into silence. "Are you still lonely?" Ethan looked at Maya, who slipped her hand into his, without promising that every future day would be easy, then looked at Noah, carrying the blue bucket that had started everything. He told his son that loneliness had not disappeared because he became wealthy enough to defeat it. It disappeared when he stopped treating love as something that would wait patiently outside every important room. Together they continued along the shoreline, leaving 3 sets of footprints that the tide would eventually erase. What remained could not be photographed or measured, because their happy ending was not the recovery of 12 stolen years. It was the decision to stop allowing those years to steal another day.